Good afternoon. Today we are with Daniel Bresette, President of the Environmental and Energy Study Institute, EESI, better known as EESI. Um, Pleasure to have you here. Thank you so much for this interview.
Thanks, Esteban, for the invitation to join you. It's great to see you again.
Yeah, likewise. Well, full disclosure for our audience. While on my Knaus Fellowship at the U.S. Congress at the Office of Representative Matsui, I attended multiple briefings by ESI, always very informative.
Great.
So we know each other.
Yeah. Frequent
um,
frequent flyer,
a frequent
EESI
flyer.
briefing
Yeah.
frequent flyer.
Yeah. So the first question that comes to mind is, what are ESI's origins and primary mission?
So EESI goes back to the early 1980s as an independent organization, and before that, we actually our founder created our predecessor organization in the early 70s. We were
Wow.
founded by a bipartisan group of members of Congress, and in the early 80s, 1984, we were spun off into an independent 501(c)(3) public charity. One of those co-founders, Dick Ottinger, who at the time represented New York in the House of Representatives, he's still on our board of directors, and
Wow.
he was one of our original. He was the original visionary
Hmm.
in the early 1970s that came up with the concept. And the idea was in that time in U.S. history, there were Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act.
Yeah.
A lot of new legislation was coming out,
Yeah, big
and it
time.
was
Yeah.
straining the capacity of Congress to keep up with all these technical and scientific issues. And so we started as a conference, and then eventually transitioned into the Institute, EESI. And our work, it's obviously kept up with the times. Back then, things were written on typewriters, and they were sent through the mail.
Yeah.
But we do congressional education on sort of the broadest range of climate, clean energy, and environmental topics. We're best known for our briefings. We do about 24 briefings every year.
Yeah.
You came to a number of them when you were a fellow. And they're, designed educational only. So there's no sort of advocacy component to it at all. We bring experts to Capitol Hill to talk to folks. We consider sort of the average congressional staff person who works on these
Yeah.
issues as kind of our core audience. And we try to help them understand the issues and understand the policy implications of what different issues could do.
Yeah.
But we also do podcasts and articles and fact sheets and newsletters. And then a couple years ago, we realized that there was this sort of untapped or unmet need among congressional staff to cover the UNFCCC. At that time, there were
Yeah.
congressional delegations traveling abroad, but
Not that
staff
many
were,
necessarily. Yeah.
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 Um, and they were reading, major media outlets cover the UNFCCC, especially the COP, right? COP is one of those
Yeah.
things where people think it happens for 2 weeks. And in fact, it's a year-long, enterprise for
Yeah.
people who spend their entire careers on international climate, governance and negotiations. But, staff were, we perceived a real need for kind of background and the ability, our ability to take sort of some of these complicated issues and relate them to a congressional audience. So that is kind of the intersection between our heritage as educators with our current role as we're talking right now. Our COP coverage is underway to
Yeah.
ensure that folks have good, reliable, science-based information to understand to answer their boss's questions.
Which is quite vital. Like, let us all remember that the congressional staffer has a very particular job with very tight deadlines and has to touch on so many subjects, especially if you work in the House.
Yeah.
So this kind of briefings really help at the time of drafting legislation and reviewing existing bills that are on a particular Congress. I guess the next thing that our audience would like to know is what are the key takeaways from EESI's first issue of its COP30 dispatch? And we'll make sure to share a link in the description on what Congress needs to know for COP30, including what's on the table at the negotiations this time.
Yeah, so our first, so COP30 Dispatch is the name of our newsletter. This was one of the sort of probably our, in addition to our briefings, probably our most comprehensive resource.
Yeah.
Our first issue came out on Friday, so I guess it was Halloween, and it largely organized around sort of setting the stage. So, this is the time of year when, you know, ordinary or closer to ordinary people start to pay attention to what's happening. This is when they're starting to read news stories. And we wanted to sort of come in with an early issue to get our resources into circulation and make sure that people had an opportunity to subscribe early, and everyone should subscribe. It's a tremendous resource. You can visit us online at eesi.org. So that first issue was really largely like, here are our resources. Here is sort of, what's happened in the intervening months.
Right.
But our really substantive coverage starts this week on Friday. And that issue will largely focus on what's happening this week in Brazil,
Yeah.
which is the Local Leaders Summit, which is taking place in Rio de Janeiro, and then the World Leaders Summit in Belém.
Mm-hmm.
Um, those will largely be sort of making headlines this week. And media coverage of COP30 is going to be focused on the dynamics. They're going to be focused on who's saying what, and they're going to
Yeah.
be focused on sort of the lack of US leadership.
Right.
Our resources try to go deeper than that and provide additional background and additional context, because it's complicated stuff. International, the UN is a complicated organization, and if you've ever attended a COP before, it's a fascinating process, but there's just an endless number of moving pieces. And so
Oh
that's
yeah.
really what our coverage tries to do. It's um, for 2 weeks, it'll be in people's minds and then it will fade. And, we have been thinking about this for months and months and months, so that when that ordinary congressional staff person's like, wait, what's a COP30?
Yeah.
What happened to COP29? What's a COP31?
And has
They
10
have a set
minutes.
of, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. They have a stable of resources that they can trust to be really reliable and informative that they can draw on.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's awesome. We will make sure to share the link in the description so people sign up. Um, well, this is a very particular COP, right? Like as you said, and the media reported, there are no high-ranking officials from the U.S. Coming. And what do we know about the U.S. presence at this COP30 beyond members of Congress that we know they'll be attending on their own or with their caucus? How does this shape the negotiations at this time?
Yeah.
How does a COP without high-ranking officials from the U.S. look like? And it's
I mean,
about
this
it's
is,
a I'm asking you to read the tea leaves now.
yes. And this is a major question. This is on everyone's mind, obviously. And I think it's also very much on the mind of the organizers. Whether it's it's in Brazil because Brazil will assume the COP presidency during
Yeah,
the event. Just today, just a few hours ago, we're starting to hear reports that the lapse in appropriations, the shutdown, will cause at least one of the planned congressional delegations to miss
mm,
COP30, as well as the local leaders forum and the heads of state summit. So, like you said, there won't be kind of an official U.S. State Department led delegation, but there were, because the United States is the party to the treaty that established the UNFCCC. The parties are the countries. So, and
indeed.
in the United States, that delegation is led by the State Department. But we were expecting a significant congressional
Yeah.
delegation to travel. The one that sounds like won't be able to go, it's really unfortunate because this was a very high profile group led by Senator John Curtis of Utah and Senator Chris Coons from Delaware. So a bipartisan delegation. Um, that's notable. It's also
Yeah.
notable that Senator Curtis is the organizer of it. He's been to COP before.
Mm.
He was recently elected to the Senate, and he's traveled to COPS back when he was a House member. He also founded the Conservative Climate Caucus. So, for lots of different reasons, having Senator Curtis have a leadership role in bringing members of Congress to COP30 was a really good and really
Yeah.
notable thing. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like that's going to happen, but it would have been a big deal. I think as the shutdown kind of endures, we'll see what happens with that. But I think we'll probably expect to see other delegations announce a
Yeah.
change in their plans. Not all members traveling
Sure.
to COP30 were planning to necessarily go to Belém, but a number of them were. Some of them were focused on other parts of other events in other parts of the country. So reading the tea leaves, we're forced now to kind of speak in hypothetical terms. So, I in the past years, the congressional delegations were primarily, I would say, concerned with making sure that their messages were reaching a global audience in their own words. I'm not sure how much a congressional delegation, I'm not sure how much impact the delegation itself had on the negotiations, but my guess is the State Department, as a sophisticated group of people,
Mm.
welcomed their participation, even if they disagreed on specific talking
Sure.
points, because it was evidence of something that they say, which is that there's a broader base of support in the United States. And the United States, I think, has a reputation of being kind of a pendulum country, sometimes very supportive, sometimes not. But having especially a bipartisan congressional delegation
Yeah.
is a proof point that I think the State Department probably pointed to and say, no, actually, they're here too because they buy it to the need to stay engaged. So this year, if they were going, their utility and what they do there would have largely been defined, I think, and dependent on sort of what that messaging would have been. Some members go to COP or have gone to COP, I should say, and some of them would be very forward looking. So imagine, not just focused on the present day, but imagine what a future administration might be willing to do or able to do. Others would have probably been focused on specific issues. I expect things like artificial intelligence, emerging generation technologies like nuclear energy
Mm.
and geothermal energy would have been major topics that they wanted to talk about in these different global settings or COP30 settings. Again, not sure whether it would have affected the outcomes too much, but it's always better to be there than not.
Yeah.
And I think it, speaks well of those members who plan to go that, they were willing to get out there and take a leadership posture.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I bet, as you said, that subject lingered in my head from my time in Congress. The small nuclear reactors would have been definitely a hot issue. Um, Again, I guess the next question is how is EESI schedule of issues for the COP30 dispatch? You have already told us a little bit about the second one, but how does it look from there onwards?
Yeah. So each day during COP30, there will be sort of thematic elements.
Mm-hmm.
There'll be also an action agenda. There'll be the official negotiations, and our newsletter is kind of broken down into different sections to help people kind of keep track of what's happening.
Yeah,
We won't have as much coverage on sort of the official U.S. positions on things because there won't be that federal
yeah,
delegation, federal administration delegation there, but um, there'll be lots of Americans at COP30. They will
yes,
be city leaders, local leaders, state leaders. There'll be lots of business leaders, and they will be engaging as observers and doing their best to again, kind of get their priorities and messaging across. So we'll definitely be looking for them for what they're working on, what their events, especially I think the subnational governments. We had the first of our three briefings on COP30 earlier today about the process of the negotiations, and subnational actors got a lot of attention.
Yeah.
And then the other two briefings we have, just as an example of kind of where we see the focus, one will be on the global cooling pledge, and the other will be on international trade and climate diplomacy. So each one
Yeah.
of our issues will be organized in a way to, cover sort of high points in, whether it's what states and locals are up to, whether there's new announcements, new reports, what's actually taking place in the negotiations, and COP, week one of COP is different than week two of COP. And so we'll also use
That's
our
true.
resources over the course of the progression to help people understand sort of how things are evolving, how the process is working. And then we will wrap things up with a final issue and a final briefing, actually, just a few days before Thanksgiving, to help
Yeah.
people kind of get a handle on some of the early takes on what some of the outcomes were.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And very interesting that as it has been said before, solutions to climate change may come from a local level. And in this COP, it may be more true than ever,
Yeah.
especially for the people from the United States coming in. So it'll be very interesting to see states and cities and different localities discussing climate change solutions at COP.
Yeah.
Beyond the negotiations, have there been, returning to the subjects that the EESI usually briefs on, beyond the negotiations, have there been, in your view, key technological breakthroughs since the last COP that could reshape the way we address climate change this year, or not?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think there were. COP29 took place a year ago, or a little bit less than a year ago, in Baku, which is the capital city of Azerbaijan. Since then, a lot's happened. Some of it's technological for sure. From a US perspective, the big change, and this is a breakthrough, not in a positive sense, but it's the winding down of the tax incentives for renewable energy, electric vehicles, and energy efficiency. Those tax incentives, experts were predicting that those tax incentives would have delivered, carbon dioxide emissions of, maybe 40% or so
Yeah.
by 2030. And that's no longer the case. And that lack of progress by the world's second largest emitter, highest per capita emitter, will not help global progress, and will have to be something that the parties that are part of the negotiations this year will have to think about and have to reconcile with
Yeah.
what they're doing. So that is from a US perspective, that's the number one change. It was just a very different investment environment for carbon neutral or zero carbon
Yeah.
energy sources and transportation. So it's not just electric vehicles, but biofuels and sustainable aviation fuel, and it's just a different environment now generally. As far as technology goes, I think if New York Climate Week was any indication, there's going to be a lot of talk about artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
And I think if I had to put a bet on what technological topic was going to get the most airtime, for me, that's probably what my individual pick would be. There will be stakeholders, I'm sure, talking about concerns about environmental impacts, whether it's energy consumption or water consumption or land use issues around siting the data centers that are then necessary to, power the AI. There'll be companies at COP30 that are
Yeah.
very, very excited to talk about what they're doing in the space, talk about their investments, talk about their, products. There's a lot of there's something of a trade show environment to COP sometimes,
Yeah.
and a lot of that is driven by the private sector,
Right, right.
and an enthusiasm, and in partnership with governments, but an enthusiasm about sort of what mobilizing capital can look like, and investments and new technologies. And so my guess is that some of the businesses there will
Yeah.
be pretty positive about what they're up to. And then there'll be countries. These countries are at COP30, hopefully working together, but they're also competitors, and they will be working to position themselves to take
Mm-hmm.
advantage of advancements in AI as well. So that's probably the one technological issue
Yeah.
that I expect to be reading the.
Protagonize COP30. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, uh, I guess our last question would be, what do you consider is more likely as an outcome of the negotiations this year? And this is again asking you to read the tea leaves, but this is a COP without the US in part, so it's a COP perhaps sure, with more of a burden on the rest of the countries. At the same time, they get more liberty, so it, it's worth asking what is probably the most likely outcome.
yeah.
But it's a far-fetched question, of course.
Yeah, I mean, it's the whole idea, right? Is, it's not. We had the briefing today, and I won't. I'm not a cop expert by any stretch of the imagination, but the panelists that we have on the briefings are, and this is absolutely something that comes up a lot. So I encourage folks to go back and rewatch that,
Yeah,
the briefing we have today. But yeah, people will be. Everyone has, their predictions and their expectations, and it certainly comes up. But as someone who is cop curious, there are a couple things that I'll be looking for sort of in our coverage to see sort of what's happening, and then, in just the as the process moves forward itself. The first is sort of COP30 um, was pitched kind of since Brazil was chosen to be to host the
yeah,
presidency. COP30 and Belen in particular were really pitched as the forest COP,
indeed.
and in some ways the environmental justice COP.
It's the Cup of
That
Amazonia. Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. The physical location of the venue matters a lot to
yeah,
Brazil. It's symbolic, but
yeah,
it's also, I think, to raise awareness of the practical issues of deforestation, tropical
yeah,
deforestation in particular. That puts a ton of pressure on Brazil to deliver. And I hope people aren't disappointed, but how people walk away from COP thinking about Brazil's ability to put focus on those issues, I think that will be something that I
yeah,
think that will help determine whether COP30 is deemed to be successful.
yeah,
Promises were made either implicitly or explicitly related to the venue itself, and people will determine, after everything is said and done, about whether or not Brazil was able to deliver on that. And I really hope that it is.
yeah.
It's a critical thing. Um, Another thing I'm going to be very curious about is sort of what role China plays.
Mm-hmm.
Not so much in front of the camera, but I'm more interested in the behind the scenes. So
Right.
the United States is, or has been, kind of a favorite target of derision and outrage at cops. Second largest emitter, largest historical emitter, largest present day per capita emitter. Sort of hegemonic superpower. And what we do and say matters a lot from an emissions perspective, but the United States also had a tremendous amount of diplomatic capital
Indeed.
to use, and the Biden State Department in particular was really instrumental. If you talk to COP insiders, they were really instrumental to getting positive outcomes in Egypt, Dubai, and in Baku.
Absolutely.
Um, and the relationship between the US and China was one that people really watched very carefully to see what the announcements were, what those dynamics were, the level of trust that those two countries were able to build over those 4 years, specifically around climate, was a big deal. And the U.S. especially in kind of the closing days, stories would start to come out about how the U.S. was, using its diplomatic muscle to try um, to get positive outcomes. And that's not to say by any means that everyone was pleased with those outcomes. A lot of parties felt excluded when the U.S. did that, but it did that, and it was a dynamic that mattered a lot. But that diplomatic muscle is MIA this year. And it'll be very interesting to watch what China is able to muster,
Right.
what the EU is able to muster, and even what Brazil is able to muster. The COP president or COP presidency has an organizational role for sure, but they also have an agenda setting role and they have kind of a procedural role
Right.
in bringing the negotiations to a close. And I don't
Right.
know,
An
it'll be
enormous amount of
interesting.
influence. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And it'll be something that we may not know really until after COP30 concludes, but I will be very curious about what happens in those inter-party dynamics on the diplomatic level. Um, and then I think the last thing I'll just mention is something we talked about during the briefing today as well. But the UNFCCC, Brazil for sure, and other parties say is that we've moved out of the negotiating stage into the implementation phase of the Paris Agreement. And so, I think as successive COPs occur, there's more pressure put on them to deliver benefits,
Indeed.
to implement benefits. And there was a lot of pressure on Azerbaijan last year, but there were also still issues to resolve last year. And Brazil will be, I think, under a lot of pressure to keep to get implementation on track. So, like, what progress will there be? Will there be progress on financing? Specifically, Brazil will prioritize financing tropical forests.
Absolutely.
And those measures. That's something that came up in the briefing today as well. The role of the action agenda will be also something to really watch. That's become a larger part of COP30s, and it's going to be the biggest and probably best organized action agenda this year. So, um, to the extent that people are trying to keep, if you're looking to take a pulse check on how implementation is shaping out, that
Right.
action agenda will be one to really, really watch. It should be
Hmm.
a decent measuring stick or a decent thermometer.
Yeah.
No pun intended on the thermometer point, but to try to keep tabs on how that's progressing. So yeah, I mean, there's not going to be any shortage of stuff to follow, but those will be three things that I'm
Yeah.
kind of especially curious about.
Yeah, you definitely got me curious about the role of the EU, China, and other actors in the absence of the US. So that's now definitely something I'll add. I'll make a mental note to add in all my interviews. Well, Daniel Bresette, president of the EESI. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for giving us this interview.
Absolutely, Esteban. It's great to see you again and safe travels to Brazil. And I hope you have a good experience and learn lots of stuff. And yeah, we'll have to connect next time you're in DC.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thanks.